Welcome to This Explainer. Look, today we are going to do something a bit radical. We are taking ancient wisdom and totally reframing it through the fascinating research of Hisataka Takasugi and what he calls metaphysical psychology. For over 2.5 millennia, Buddhism has offered these really profound insights into human suffering and liberation. But today, we're going to examine it through a completely new, incredibly analytical lens. So, what if Buddhism isn't actually a religion? I mean, we usually look at these ancient doctrines as, mystical or purely spiritual. But what if they are actually a highly precise, reproducible framework for diagnosing a literal structural glitch in how we process reality? Takasugi suggests that Buddhism might just be one of history's most sophisticated psychologies of human meaning-making. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start by reframing core Buddhist philosophy, then break down the 3 layers of reality, dive into the anatomy of suffering, explore identity and ontological investment, redefine awakening as psychological freedom, and finally wrap up with a system for liberation.
All right, Section 1. Reframing core Buddhist philosophy, moving from mysticism to a psychology of meaning-making. For 2,500 years, Buddhist teachings have beautifully, but honestly sometimes confusingly, blurred the lines between metaphysics and spiritual doctrines. What we are doing today is stripping all that ambiguity away to find the actual psychological mechanics underneath. Moving right along to Section 2, 3 layers of reality, decoding the unified theory. To really understand this structural malfunction of human suffering, we first have to break down Takasugi's unified theory. He divides human experience into 3 distinct pillars. And understanding the difference between these 3 is literally the key to everything that follows. The first layer is ontology. This is simply what is. It's the bare-bones, structural nature of reality, completely independent of what you or I think about it. Take the Buddhist concept of impermanence, or anicca. Everything changes. Bodies age, civilizations rise and fall. Now, what's absolutely crucial here is that this ontological reality inherently contains 0 pain. It's totally neutral. Reality just changes. The suffering, it doesn't live here. That brings us to this second layer, ontic experience. And this encompasses our entirely natural human preferences. We are valuing organisms. It is completely normal to want your health to continue, to desire love, to seek success, or to just really crave a good cup of coffee when your alarm goes off. These aren't toxic cravings. They're just the natural orientation of a human being. Wanting things is absolutely not the problem. But then we hit the third layer, existential meaning-making. And oh boy, this is exactly where the glitch happens. This layer is all about the interpretations and absolute demands we slap onto our experience. It's that exact moment when our completely natural preferences mutate into rigid demands that reality literally must obey us. Instead of just observing reality, we start judging it. So how does that mutation actually happen? Let's get into Section 3. The anatomy of suffering, how desires mutate into toxic necessities. Take a look at this formula. It completely decodes the Buddhist concept of affliction, or kilesa. Historically, we've all been told that desire is the root of suffering, right? But metaphysical psychology says, wait, actually no. Natural desire is perfectly fine. Affliction only happens when a normal desire, like I want this job, is involuntarily hijacked by the existential necessity of I must have this. It's the crossing of the wire. The problem isn't wanting. The problem is demanding. There is a really crucial distinction here between pain and suffering. On the left, we've got ontic pain. This is just the unavoidable discomfort of actually caring about things. Loss hurts, rejection hurts, traffic jams hurt. You think, man, I wish this were different. And that is entirely natural. But on the right, we have existential suffering. That's the mental torment created when pain is amplified by a demand. Instead of, I wish this were different, your brain is screaming, this must not be happening. Normal pain becomes resistance, and that resistance becomes agonizing suffering. And this leads us to how Takasugi redefines dukkha, the famous Buddhist term for suffering. It's not just one simple feeling. It's this cascading layer collapse phenomenon. Step 1, you experience normal ontic pain from a frustrated goal. Step 2, you add existential resistance, demanding that this shouldn't be happening. And step 3, that resistance actually tricks you into an ontological misinterpretation. You literally start believing that existence itself is fundamentally unfair or broken. You tangle reality, desire, and interpretation into one giant knot of anguish. So why do we do this? Why do we insist that the universe has to bend to our will? That brings us to Section 4, Identity and Ontological Investment, the ongoing narrative of the self.
We tend to think of ourselves as these permanent, fixed objects. But honestly, the self is actually an ongoing narrative. We are constantly spinning stories like, I am successful, or even, I am a failure. But the contents of those stories, our relationships, our memories, they are continually changing. The self isn't a solid thing at all. It's a process. And true psychological freedom only emerges when your identity becomes flexible enough to evolve without totally collapsing when the narrative shifts. But we hate that flexibility, don't we? So we set traps for ourselves through what Takasugi calls ontological investment. This is a wild concept. We don't just desire external objects, we literally invest actual portions of our identity into them. We tie our sense of self to our status, our stuff, or our reputation, and because we've invested our very existence into these impermanent things, a damaged reputation literally feels like a damaged self. We are entrusting our psychological survival to things that, by the laws of reality, simply cannot remain stable. If human anguish is just a structural error caused by tying our existence to impermanent things, then we really need to look at how to patch this glitch. Section 5, Awakening as Psychological Freedom, Redefining Nirvana. These principles completely demystify nirvana. Awakening isn't about escaping reality or transforming into some emotionless robot who doesn't want anything. It's about achieving ontological freedom. In this state, your desires for success and love and health, they still remain. What changes is that the existential necessity is entirely removed. Success is preferred, but it's not required for you to exist. Love is treasured, but not demanded. You achieve freedom not by eliminating desire, but by dropping the absolute demand that reality must obey you. Okay, so how do we actually pull this off? To practically achieve this freedom without retreating from normal life, we can turn to the famous Eightfold Path. Section 6, the system for liberation, the Eightfold Path as a regulatory protocol. Takasugi argues that rather than being some esoteric spiritual ladder, the Eightfold Path maps perfectly as a comprehensive regulatory protocol. Think about it. Right view and intention give us the clarity to recognize our desires accurately. Right speech, action, and livelihood? That aligns our behavior without turning those goals into absolute demands. Right effort acts like a thermostat, regulating our emotional escalation so concern doesn't mutate into anguish. And right mindfulness stabilizes our perception so we can see reality exactly as it is, without the distortion of our fears. It is a brilliant, practical system for preserving your psychological freedom while fully engaging in the real world. I want to conclude this explainer with a really powerful thought from Hisataka Takasugi. He says, "The world does not need to change for suffering to diminish. What must change is the demand that the world conform to our necessities. To dramatically reduce our own suffering, we don't need to fight reality, we simply need to update our psychological software." So I'll leave you with this question to ponder today. What absolute, rigid demand are you placing on reality right now? And what would actually happen if you simply chose to let it go?